All right. Well, we're live, so I want to welcome the attendees here. And I also, just for those of you who don't know, Monty and I did a previous video. We discussed everything under the sun for a 3-hour period. Hopefully, we'll discuss everything under the sun under a little bit. We'll put in an hour and a half today, and we should be able to cover what we didn't get to cover, mainly talking about UFOs and talking about the eclipse and talking about all of the disclosure elements that are now revealing themselves as we reach and move towards the singularity event. So this is the
Yep.
official start. And Monty, do you want to introduce yourself to the audience?
I'm Monte Farber of the duo of Monte Farber and Amy Zerner. I'm the author of an astrological sort of game that teaches you astrology called Karma Cards that a lot of people seem to know about, and it's been out since 1988. And I've done a lot of other books with Amy Zerner, my wife, and the Enchanted Tarot. And I do astrology is our language of love. I've been doing it since the 70s, and I love it. And I love to follow William because I think he's one of the few astrologers that knows what the hell he's talking about. That's who
Thank
I
you.
am. Well, it's true.
Thank you. Thank you, Monty. Yeah, so Monty and I go back to the Long Island 80s,
Yep.
90s era, where that was the secondary nexus of New Age and metaphysical zeitgeist. I mean, it was certainly happening in West Hollywood, in the Bodhi Tree bookstore,
Yep.
but it was also happening
Stan and
big time
Phil.
in Long Island.
Stan and Phil from the Poetry Bookstore, good friends. I miss them terribly.
Okay, yeah, actually, I do have an enchanted spell board. Here we go. Here we go. Got it right here.
I am
When
impressed.
all else fails, this is what I use, folks.
I can't wait to tell Amy that you use the Enchanted Spell board.
That's
That's
right. That's
awesome.
right. Yeah, so I got this back in the late 80s, early 90s in Long Island, and that's how I got introduced to you because I heard about you, right? And you were you were all the way out east, right?
Yeah, yeah.
I was in Port Jefferson,
Sure.
and you were in the Hamptons at that time, correct?
Yeah, Amy grew up out here, so I've been with her since 1975, but we're in the same house.
Right. So it's a great, it's really, it's actually a divination. It's like a divination
Yeah.
game, and it's extremely, it's something you can, this certainly while we have all this extra time on our hands, is something that people can get and start using with friends and family and just have a great time divinating and getting these the magic message indicator. I really like that. It was
Yeah.
very innovative of you.
Well, thank you. And this is our newest one since we're selling. The Creativity Oracle. It just came out.
Wow.
Yeah,
Cool.
yeah, yeah. It's 80 cards and it helps you get in touch with your creativity. But
Cool.
Amy and I, that like I was saying before, we're pretty much living the way we've always lived. We're here. We're doing new books. We're doing new photography. Amy's clothes. I happen to have one of her tapestries behind me. That's Poseidon
Yes.
in
Wow.
honor
Beautiful.
of our conversation about the future and the past and Atlantis and Poseidon. So we're living this magic life, and what part of my magic life was getting to know Zecharia Sitchin and getting to know his work. And I've always thought that there were extraterrestrial beings because it makes no sense at all if you're a scientist to think that there isn't, because the universe is too vast to say that we're the only people in it. It just makes no sense. And plus, I saw one when I was 16. So.
Right, right. Exactly. You were initiated quite early into high strangeness. Is this not
Oh
true?
yeah. Yeah, I was in the Civil Air Patrol, which is the civilian auxiliary of the Air Force. And I was walking down the street with my friend, who later went on to become a jet pilot for the Navy, landing on carriers and flying admirals. So he was about the straightest scientific person that I knew. And we were both walking up the street going to drill team practice, and we both looked up in the sky because we were trained to look at contrails and see what kind of an airplane that was. And we're talking about 1966. So a lot of the planes left contrail. And we saw this thing way up, and it made a right turn, a right angle, not a
Wow.
slow right angle. I mean, boom, boom, like,
Right,
and we
right,
both screamed because
right.
we both saw it, and
Unbelievable.
we would be considered trained observers. We were in the Civil Air Patrol. That's one of the things we did was to identify airplanes from their trails.
Hmm.
and we saw it. And after that, what can you say? You saw it.
Right, right. Interesting. So you were initiated early. I was initiated around the time in 1978 where when I was camping out, I was a Boy Scout at that time,
Right,
and
there you
we
go.
saw a number. Yeah, I was a Boy Scout. I didn't get to Eagle, but I got to first class.
It's
And
cool.
yeah, and it was a big thing. It was very common. I think the Boy Scouts are now technically declared bankruptcy, but at that time it was,
That
yeah, it's very sad. But it was a big thing to do, and I went on many, many camping trips throughout my teenage years. And I remember seeing a number of unusual sightings in the sky. And then
Yeah.
that was the summer of around 78, and then Close Encounters of the Third Kind was
Wow.
released in the film, in the movies, and that had a very profound effect on me because of the realism, and that sort of was my red pill moment when I took the deep dive into getting every book I could get my hands on to really follow and invest into the subject up to this day.
Well, there's no doubt in my mind what I saw. I can remember it even now. And when you see something like that, and plus, no mathematician can say that we're the only beings in the universe. When you're talking about a constantly expanding universe of infinite numbers of stars, to say that
Right,
we're the only beings here,
right,
that's like saying I'm an idiot to say
right.
that we're the only beings here.
Right, right. So during this period, during the 90s especially, as I was coming of age and I graduated college and I started going to the bookstores well, I was doing astrology, but I started going to bookstores in the city, and I started hearing the name Zecharia Sitchin.
Yes.
And then, a lot of his books were very, very popular.
Yeah.
I don't think many of the audience members know. Many of the younger audience members don't know who
Right.
he is. So, do you want to introduce him to
Sure.
us?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Zecharia Sitchin was a linguistic scholar who trained himself to read the cuneiforms, the Sumerian texts from 5,000 years ago. And it all started for him when he was studying the Bible, because I think he grew up in Israel when it was called Palestine. And he
Mm-hmm.
was reading the Bible, and it says something about the Nephilim, because he studied it in Hebrew.
Mm-hmm.
And it said something, and his teacher said, and God said this, and he stood up in class and said, but teacher, Nephilim is plural. And the gods said. And they immediately told him to shut up. But it launched him on a lifetime examination of where the Bible came from. And once he got, and he could speak, I don't know if he could speak it, but he could read Akkadian and all those, and Babylonian and all these other different things. And when he started translating the Sumerian texts, he just translated what they said straight without saying, everything in the when you go to the Middle East, everything is a temple. He didn't see everything as a temple. He saw that as, this building had a function. There's a sign. He assigned science to the Sumerians because they had a cosmology. They knew about the planet Pluto, except they counted from the outside in. Pluto was called Gaga, like Lady Gaga in
Mm-hmm.
Sumerian, and
Right.
it referenced the seventh planet. And they had a whole cosmological story about coming to this planet from their planet, which comes back every 3,600 years, a planet that they called Nibiru. Sounds
Nibiru.
like,
Nibiru, is that
right,
correct?
which sounds like Hebrew.
Hebrew. Okay.
Yeah, and Abraham's father was a priest of Ur. Ur was in Samaria. So the whole, like the Jewish cosmology, I think this year is 5780. That date started because of a whole rebellion, and the leader of Nibiru came down to quell the rebellion and to take his two sons and sort of bang their heads together. But that's getting ahead of myself.
Yeah, it's getting ahead of ourselves. So basically, from what I know of Stitchin's work, from his 1976 book, The 12th Planet, which was
Yeah.
something I read in the early to mid 90s. Again, I was initiated a little bit later, although just for the record, I read Eric von Daniken's book,
Sure, Chariots
Chariot
of the
of the
Gods.
Gods, in 1974 when I was in
Wow.
fourth grade. That was my first real non-picture book. You had
Oh
to read
my
a book,
God.
right? So I selected this book, and at first my teacher said, "No, you can't read this book." She wrote a letter to my parents. My parents said they looked at the book and they didn't think there was a problem with it. And that was the first. I had to write a report on it, but
Wow.
and I talked about the fact that the ideals or the ideas he puts in his books
Uh-huh.
is essentially talking about an extraterrestrial civilization that essentially influenced early human culture, had essentially provided certain technologies.
Yes.
Certainly, there's tremendous evidence and is a paleo contract of ancient astronauts with the Egyptians, the Sumerians,
Yep.
and others, and the Mayans as well.
Sure.
So then I read the next book, very similar, was in the 90s, which was the 12th planet, which is talking about the planet Nibiru, right? That
Right.
follows this, it's beyond Neptune. And Pluto is really a planet that's part of the Neptune subsystem. So this is so Nibiru is the 12th planet, and it's following a long elliptical orbit,
Yeah.
reaching, so it gets to the inner part of our solar system every 3,600 years, as you stated. And that's where it starts. And then is a very interesting, almost like Italian romantic opera tragedy trilogy of
Yeah.
how humanity was basically a creation
Yep.
of the Anunnaki.
This is true. And Anunnaki is a Sumerian word that means those who from heaven to earth came. And
Right.
Anu, A-N-U, is the name of the big boss on Nibiru, the father of Enlil and Enki, the two brothers. You know, I mean, the Cliff's Notes version of Nibiru and why it's there explains. The thing I love about Sitchin's work is it explains things that you could look up and see in the sky right now.
Mm-hmm.
He said 4 billion years ago, or this is what the Sumerians said, and this is the creation myth they did every year. 4 billion years ago, the planet Nibiru and its moons, which they called winds, was captured by the sun's gravity, came through our solar system, wreaked
Mm-hmm.
havoc, and one of the winds, one of the moons, struck Earth a glancing blow, knocked it out of its place, which was, according to the Fibonacci scale, should be where the asteroid belt is now, and knocked it into where it is, put it on the 23 and whatever half degree angle that gives us the seasons. And it then made its turn out between the, I think it's between the orbits. Well, it passes close to the Earth, but it's between Mars and Jupiter, I think.
Right.
And so
Right.
every 3,600 years, it would come back, and it has its own atmosphere based on volcanic emissions, and life, apparently human life, evolved on that planet first. They used gold to suspend in the atmosphere because every time they would go out into space and every time they would come through the solar system, which is when they set Uranus on its side and knocked Pluto out of, probably it was a moon of Neptune, like you said, and did all this havoc in the solar system.
Mm-hmm.
They would suspend gold in the atmosphere because that was a way to prevent cosmic rays from getting through. And in the Earth, when we had the hole in the ozone layer, a few decades ago, one of the theories was to suspend gold particles in the atmosphere to prevent the cosmic rays from getting through.
Right. Right. So we'll get to gold in a minute because it's
Yes.
something they also ingested.
Yes. Yeah.
They ingest it, but I'll get to that in a minute. I just want to sort of summarize what you said. So, according to Sitchin, essentially the planet Pluto, which was really originally a satellite of Saturn, but Nibiru's
Right. Right.
gravity perturbed it and pushed it
Right.
out beyond Neptune, or became part of Neptune's suborbital system, right?
Right.
Giving it
Sometimes
its
it's within
peculiar
its
orbit,
orbit. Yeah.
right? And then, uh, now, of course, when the Anunnaki arrive is not always clear. It's not clear to me whether the 12th planet came into orbit or came into the inner solar system, but at some point, the Sumerians, so the Sumerian gods, right, are
That's them.
allocated, right,
Yeah,
is the Anunnaki, and the Bible calls them the Nephilim in
exactly.
Genesis,
Yes.
right? Okay, and they were the ones, according to Sitchin, that basically jump-started
Yep.
Homo sapiens, because up to that time there was only essentially two or three other species of mankind, and the predominant one at that period was the Neanderthal. And supposedly, now they somehow modified or extracted that DNA, injected their DNA, modified it, enhanced it, and created a human-like uh, terrestrial race,
Yep.
right? And
Us.
us, and then they started using us. They started uh,
Yeah.
training us and teaching us, and we essentially became indentured servants or slaves,
Yep.
right, to
100%.
them, looking for gold, extracting gold minerals, all types of minerals, especially gold, which they found and mined in Africa,
Yes.
according to the. I mean, we're talking about texts that are over 5,000 years old, and talking about another continent in detail.
Yep.
And so this is very, so there's some form of genetic engineering to create a slave race to extract the gold, right? And this gold was used for technological purposes to, like you stated, to make modifications to their atmosphere so their race could continue, right?
Yep.
Right. And they also lived in an extraordinary amount of time, and they
Yes,
also
they
had
did.
psychokinetic powers due to taking the physical gold and converting it into a white powder that they could ingest.
Yeah. Well, they lived a long time because think about it. Their year was 3,600 years
Right.
long. And so when they got here, it was like day, night, day, night, day, night.
Mm-hmm.
And they had to take potions to keep, and they started living shorter times. The Anunnaki who came here, the reason they came here, according to their story, was because of a fight. Something went on their planet. Some guy tried to take over for Anu, and he was banished. And he somehow got through heaven, which was their word for the hammered out bracelet. The word heaven, according to Sitchin, was from the word hammered out bracelet, which is the asteroid belt. He somehow got through. They knew from their flybys of Earth that there was gold here in the water, and which there is in the ocean. And so he came through to Earth. They sent a mission to go get him, and there's all kinds of talk about a drama, and the drama
There was
ends
a civil war,
on
right?
Mars.
Civil war amongst the Anunnaki for
There
a
was
number of reasons.
well, yes, and that's why he fled, because the Anu and his sons took, they won,
Mm-hmm.
and so he fled. But the face on Mars is dedicated to the bad guy, to the rebel. That's what the face on Mars is he died there on Mars, and Mars used to have an atmosphere
Yes.
until the great flood 12,000 years ago, when the reason the flood happened is because they knew that Nibiru was going to pass so close to the Earth, it was going to slow the rotation down. And think about it, the oceans are on the Earth, it's turning around, the Earth slows, the water keeps going and flows to the poles. And so it was sort of like, Moses crossing the
Right.
Red Sea. The water went to the poles and sloshed around for 40 days and 40 nights, but that's a whole other story.
Right. And that story from the Genesis story is actually 12,000 years older than the
Yes,
5,000 year,
yes,
the 5,000 or the 3 to 5,000 year version from the Hebrew Bible.
right.
Correct?
Oh,
Okay.
yeah.
So that's not an
He
original
said
story.
the Anunnaki, he said, Zecharia said, also believed in a supreme being, which I found fascinating, because the Earth people call them the gods of our fathers because they lived so long that their fathers knew the same guy.
Right. So I want to go back to that because what they basically were doing, and this was discovered in Arizona back in the early 1990s, when they found this white powder gold. Actually, let me go back. They actually, during the Egyptian pyramid excavations, they found these vast stores of a white powder. They didn't know what it was. And it was in the area of the pyramids that only the pharaoh and the high priest could enter. and they manufactured. Now they saw gold there, and they didn't make the connection at the time. This was later discovered in the United States in the late 1980s, early 1990s, where they discovered how to take physical gold, break it down into a monoatomic form, a form that was ingested by the high priest and only by the pharaoh, right? Later on, this type of story where Akhenaten IV, who, according to many historians, alternative historians, I should say, believe is Moses, all right? Moses was an Egyptian pharaoh who took the sides of the Israelites, who later on became the Jews, who were the chosen people by God to ingest the white powder, which is called in the biblical text the manna, the same stuff that the Anunnaki were ingesting that gave them psychokinetic powers, the ability to divine, the ability to remote view, the ability to live extremely long, youthful lives, and the ability to have extraordinary powers and prowess.
Well, you know, there's something, if you can Google this actually, junk genes. In our genetic code, there are these genes that the genetic scientists call junk genes. And what the Sitchin material suggests is that those junk genes, if they were turned on by what the Anunnaki used to call the water of life, that would increase our lifespan to at least that of Methuselah, which was 400 years.
Right.
When we were created, we lived that long, because why would they want something that was slaving for them to die? So they would try to keep us going as long as they could.
Exactly. And what's interesting here is one of the reasons they had this power struggle was because there was the split where they weren't in total agreement to keep humanity completely enslaved, especially when they were starting to breed with them. They were breeding with the very creation that they created.
Sure were. They were worse than any. They were like Hugh Hefner.
Exactly. And especially they were able to modify the genes where the women had extraordinary beauty, right? That would make the current set of models look lame at the very best. So what I've read is that these humans that they started bonding with, and there was a split, right? And they started giving certain humans, I guess favored ones, the mana, the gold, the it's called, actually in Egyptian, it's called the fakuts. And this is very interesting because this fakuts gets passed to in Judaism, becomes the mana that is allowed to be ingested. And they actually take the white powder and they put it into a like a cake, right? With a cake that's composed of wheat and honey and water, because the white powder is actually it's a dry powder, but you put it into a water solution for the ingestion purposes. And the reason for this is because then Moses could take the teachings from the pharaohs that was given by the Sumerians, that was given by the Anunnaki, this profound knowledge, and they would not only be they could understand and carry this profound spiritual knowledge, right? And then from that start a new civilization. This was basically the idea that eventually became what we know today as the Judaic religion, right? So this is all interconnected, and I just find it really fascinating that Sitchin was the one doing this basically on his own. I mean, just amazing.
Well, he sort of created a universal field theory for the origin of man. And it explains all the monumental stone sculptures around the world, like the pyramids. I mean, he has a very unique explanation for the Great Pyramids and why the Sphinx faces east, and the pyramids were supposedly, their capstones were just like the one in Las Vegas. You know, they had the light shining up. They were basically landing beacons to help the heavy lifters landing. And Jerusalem, which has been fought over for millennia, was the control center, and they would land in Baalbek, which was the new landing place after the flood. You see, the flood changed everything. The flood, it buried stuff under silt. It also exposed the gold in the mountains in South America because of the ocean. washing over them. And that's why, like you said, they went to start a new civilization. And they started in South America, except this time they didn't give them writing and they didn't give them the wheel and they didn't give them metal tools because they realized what problems it had caused in the Middle East. And once again, you have Lake Titicaca, the highest navigable,
Right.
and it was basically just a gold thing. And there's theories about, the Nazca lines were just like when they were leaving the Earth, when the Anunnaki were leaving the Earth from that area, they decided, the pilots would like doodle with lasers and make the Nazca lines. I mean, the thing about Sitchin's work is, first of all, it explains how all these things were built. Like in Baalbek, which is what I said was the landing place, that was the most sacred place outside of Rome in the world. When Alexander conquered that area, he went right to the Temple of Jupiter, which Rome had built on this heavy lifter platform, which
Right.
has stones that have 150,000 tons or some incredible, maybe it's
Hmm.
150 tons. They couldn't even be lifted today if we wanted to lift them. And
Correct. We couldn't
they,
construct it, nor lift it, nor change it.
no, and this is supposedly that was the launch pad where these heavy lifters taking the gold up to Mars, where the really big ones would take off. It's
Right.
just like it was like a factory. The Earth was like a
Absolutely.
factory.
I mean, one of the things is Stitchin talked about in 2024 BC that there during a war between the factions of the
Yes.
Anunnaki, right?
Yeah.
The evil wind described in the Lament
Yes.
of when was destroyed,
Yes.
which is the exact year of 2024, they did find signatures of nuclear
Yeah.
fallout,
Yes.
of nuclear weapons fallout, because that stuff lasts, that signature will last for eons, right?
Right. That's the spaceport was blown up by nuclear weapons, and you're right. They didn't realize that the evil wind would come to them too.
Exactly. So, I mean, there's a lot of smoke to this fire here,
Oh yeah.
and Stitchin is not giving his due. I mean, I will say that finally, I mean, he is getting traction here because we did see like Coast to Coast AM. I
Yeah.
think he was on in 2010, presented Stitchin with a Lifetime Achievement Award. But
Aw.
a lot of the millennials really don't know who he is and what contributions he made in terms of really what do they call it, the the intelligent design doctrine, which basically all of those sci-fi movies, especially the alien movies, if you've seen the
Yeah.
latest set of Alien, right, they're all talking about the engineers. They call the extraterrestrials in the alien movies the engineers.
Well, Sitchin talked to people like you know, uh, George Lucas and Star Wars. Anakin Skywalker, Anunnaki. It's not a
Yeah,
coincidence.
right, of course.
You know,
Right.
I mean, he told me he talked to them about it. He asked Amy and I because he loved her work so much. He said it reminded him of the ancient way art was done, which was to incorporate wisdom into different parts of the art. He wanted us to do the children's book version of it, and I said, well, if I was going to do it, I would do it along the lines of Planet of the Apes, the first one. And he said that was his favorite movie. so,
Right, right.
so because
Exactly.
you idiots, what have you done?
What have you done, right?
Yeah,
You blew it all up. You blew it
I
all up,
know.
right?
The,
You,
the reason we were invented was what happened was they really sent the team down to get gold from seawater. Couldn't do it because it was too much of a pain in the ass and not enough gold. Then they started mining, and there's evidence of mining exhibits in 100 years ago in South America.
right.
And excuse me, South Africa. Sorry, got my continents mixed up. And then what happened is they rebelled, and so they do so. So Anu, the father of Enlil and Enki, Enki is the one that liked us. Enlil is the one that was in charge but hated the people because he wasn't above like screwing people, but
Right.
he thought we made too much noise and we were bred like rabbits. He was not the nicest person. So that's the split personality of God in the Bible, is those two guys. So the father comes down and says, you guys are just crazy. So Enki says, what we'll do? We'll take the Lulu, what they call the local, like you said, the Neanderthal. We'll mix our seed with him. And Enki, his symbol was the snake, like the caduceus, like the
Right.
DNA. I
Right.
mean, there's a reason that the caduceus is the symbol of medicine. They knew about DNA back then. And
Right.
so, but at the
Yes.
time, we were like mules. We couldn't reproduce. When we were first done, the Anunnaki princesses, who, as you said, were very pretty, um, had to carry these beings that were going to be slaves, and they didn't like it. So then, and Key said, you know what? I'll make it so that they can reproduce. That's the story of Adam and Eve. When they knew they were naked, they knew that they could reproduce. They started having sex. They weren't mules anymore, and that's when they got thrown out of the Garden of Eden. I mean, there's so much in the Bible that is based on the Sumerian creation myth and about how all those things happen.
Right. So there was actually a research in a genome sequencing consortium in which they extracted the DNA of a princess, an
Yes,
Anunnaki princess who was half god, half Anunnaki, and half
the one at the
human.
British Museum.
Right. And they stated out of 223 genes, they they did a process to determine a genomic evolutionary tree. And what happened was is that they were supposed to reveal, like they
Yeah,
would, in other words, all this junk DNA that got
yeah,
activated by ingesting the white powder gold, by the way, right?
right. The
Uh,
water of
and
life.
right, exactly. This we would be able to prove out with this test that basically um, Stitchin paid for. Stitchin put the funding for that, which was substantial. I think it was over $1 million
Well, yes,
for
actually, I know the person that actually backed
okay.
it. Yeah.
Right. And the revelation that now supposedly we're still waiting to hear what happened
People are
when
afraid.
from the analysis of those 40 potential genes.
Well, there was analysis done, but the geneticist was really, he's very famous, doesn't want to say it because it'll never work again.
Right.
People right now there's a
Well, the
suppression.
audience doesn't know, Monty. The audience doesn't know.
Well, okay.
Okay.
Well, there is a suppression of all this for the same reason that why do we get all this disinformation about
Right.
the COVID, the Wuhan virus? Because if it really got out, people would go a little nuts because people, face it, we're all nuts in some way. And there are people that if they were faced with irrefutable evidence that we are descended from extraterrestrials, especially people who have a beautiful understanding of the Christian Bible and the other things, when you rock someone's world like that, sometimes it's not good. But that goddess that you're talking about in the British Museum, she's like 7 feet long. And then if you're going to the University of Pennsylvania's museum, they have a headdress of a Sumerian goddess. It's like this big. I mean, I have a
Yes.
big head,
So
but
she's half human, half god.
yes, and the whole
Yes.
story of Gilgamesh, which is the oldest saga in the history of the world, is about Gilgamesh, who was half god, half man, and he wanted to go to Nibiru so that they would allow him to live forever, or
Right.
or a long time, because his mother was a goddess, but his
Right.
father was not. So that's the whole story of Gilgamesh, and then the thing that comes out to get him, I forget what it's called. It's a machine that's set to. It was guarding the spaceport. It was like a robot guard of the spaceport. And Sitchin did things like he predicted that Uranus and Neptune would look the same, and that was not proven until 1979 when they did the
With the
flyby.
Voyager 2 pass
Exactly,
bys. Yeah.
exactly. I mean, and he never said it was him. He always said, "This is what I'm reading." He would never let anything out in a book until he had researched it like 20 different ways and footnoted it. But anytime you see anything in the Middle Eastern art with the planet of the crossing, a cross on a circle with wings, that's Nibiru. That's what they're talking about, the planet of the
Right.
crossing. It's pretty
Right.
cool. I love it. I mean,
Pretty
to
cool.
me, it's just so enjoyable.
Yeah, no, it's really fascinating material, and it really opens up about what's happening now because a lot of this information has been suppressed, especially now with
Yeah,
this virus running virulent, and it doesn't look like we're not going back to normal for a while. I don't care what happens on May 1st. It could possibly backfire and be the very thing that puts us into a full-blown catastrophic economic breakdown. We're already in a depression. So
yeah,
folks out there, like Monte and I talked last time, we're not in a recession, we're in a depression. And if they do not lift this, they don't do this right. If they lift those restrictions too soon with this virus and we have reinfection rates soaring in a second wave, we could see a really worst case scenario unfold that's going to be a lot worse than anybody's been talking about at this
Well,
point.
yeah, I agree. And like I said before we started, I mean, just what you need, another reason to hate the baby boomers, you know, and I would say if it wasn't for the fact that it is so contagious as it is a bioweapon and it is something that is engineered to not just knock out baby boomers, I would say, you know, be like Amy and me and I'm 70, sequester all the people that are at risk and everybody else go back to work. But Jesus, you hear stories of people your age and younger getting so sick they can't move, they die.
No, the
And it's like
problem
high
is,
altitude.
yeah, absolutely. The problem is now is the biggest mistake they made is they did not inject liquidity on a consistent basis to the taxpayers.
Yes,
And right, so people are running out of money. People listening to this show right now are almost out of money. They have,
right.
they have had no cash flow liquidity income for nearly 30 days now. And so, and as they're trying to work from home, these companies that are getting bailed out, and everyone's getting bailed out, everything is getting bailed out, every sector is getting bailed out. They're firing people as they're getting bailed out, and they're going to continue to get bailed out all the way through now and the end of this year. So they injected $6 trillion since March 6th to date has been injected into every corporation, every large size corporation, too big to fail bank, every in the bond funds, in the junk bond funds, in the corporate, in the stocks, you name it, they injected it. They even know that's still not enough. They're going to inject another 6 trillion between now and into the summer to avert a financial collapse. And yet all they're going to give people is $1,200, one shot deal, take it or leave it. If you don't
Yeah.
qualify, too bad. And there's a possibility, and I believe this is going to happen. I'm not just saying this to say it. I believe right now, if they lift those restrictions too early and they let people go on the beach and then go to the parks and do
They're
whatever,
doing it. They're doing it now.
they're doing it now, right? If that happens, we'll have a second rate of infection. They'll have to totally shut down the economy. The supply chains are already broken. And we're going to completely the food supply chain. Forget the supply chain of products that you shop and get at Walmart, right? Which you can't even get now. So we're talking like even going to Costco, right, to pick up toilet paper once a month is not going to be possible. And then they're going to have to send out they're going to have to militarize the transportation and the supply chain, and
Well, yeah.
it's
I
going to
remember.
also.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
during the gas crisis in the 70s, they used to have police escorts for the gas tank. You know, the tankers delivering to the stations. Yeah,
Right.
and things like that can change really quickly because basically what they're doing with all the injections of liquidity to the corporations is debasing the currency. They're making the dollars worth less. But
Exactly.
I don't know about you, but I haven't gotten any money. And you know, we applied for the business thing because we're a business and we have some of our companies we do business with are not paying us. And
Right.
one of them's going out of business or going for
Right.
Chapter 11.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so, you know, I think they're giving it to the big ones, hoping that it'll trickle down. But those guys are going to end up doing stock buybacks
There is no
again.
trickle down. There's no medium or small. There's no medium to small size business bailout program. There might be some loans. They were initially going to push out another program to bail out the small businesses. That failed. Now that's all being held up in Congress. Congress is on. I think Congress is out on sabbatical at the moment.
Jesus.
And right, so this is the situation. The reason I'm bringing this up with you is we have this eclipse. Here's the US chart like we discussed with the Hancock ratification. And if you look at this eclipse is on the world point. It's extremely powerful. I know we discovered this a few weeks back, but it's worth going
Yeah.
over because things have really accelerated. And look what house it's in. It's in the 8th house.
Other people's money.
Right. And it's also debt.
Yeah.
Debt. And it also, other people's money. It has to do with interest rates, debt. It has to do with leverage. It has to do with bailouts, but it also has to deal with bankruptcies, defaults, debt repudiation, debt liquidation. So it's a combination of all those things. And we're approaching this eclipse event, and it's going to hit what? The Venus. And what does Venus
Yeah.
rule? Venus
Money.
rules money. It actually
Yeah.
rules the currency itself, the purchasing power of the currency.
Yes. No, it's not a stable situation that can be sustained. That's the problem.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I just think the fact is we're heading towards a potentially catastrophic scenario, especially in regards to what I'm looking at is we're going to see deflation while we see price inflation. So deflation means everything is slowing down, companies are
Right.
going out of business, there's not enough liquidity. So there's
Right.
there's a bailout, companies are bailing out and firing people and laying off people and furloughing people, but that's really laying them off. That's just
No, it's
another,
true. And
right?
deflation is like if you have money, you're great, but if you don't, you're screwed.
Right. So that's what's happening. We have accelerated deflation. For the people who do have money and holding on to that cash every day and in every way, their purchasing power is going down. So let's give an example because people don't really understand purchasing power. They think they do, but it's so $50, what $50 will buy you today, it will cost $85 by the time August arrives to buy
Yeah.
the same thing.
And who's sitting there like a buzzard waiting to buy everything? China. And every United States is going to become the bargain area for buying all these companies. I mean, you can, today it's Neiman Marcus going bankrupt. Tomorrow it's something else going bankrupt. If they want them, they can get them now because they have all this cash that, and this is what everybody else should do also. What's the purpose of having digits in a bank account when you should have things that you could hold, things that you could do something with, things that you could live off of? So I'm sure China and all the countries that hold our debt are going to realize, you know what, we better convert this into real goods.
Right, but they're not going to be able to because we're talking over $1 trillion. And they know those US Treasury bonds are worth nothing. That debt that they're holding is not equal to money. But not only is it not equal to money for China, it's not equal to money for pension funds that are holding all of
Well,
these bonds.
that's the time
That's
bomb.
that's a time bomb. Someone's going to say to me at some point, William, who stole my
Yeah.
pension?
Yes, without question. And the unfunded pension liabilities is enough to wipe the country out by itself.
By itself. And so that's why they've been bailing out the bond markets, the junk bond, insolvent companies.
Yep.
They are bailing out everyone and everything except us,
Right.
except us,
Well,
right?
that is what is going to fuel, and it's not going to be me or you, but eventually there are going to be people who are going to get so pissed off, they're going to start having these kind of meetings at the courthouses and all these other places. And, and eventually all it takes is a couple of crazy people, unfortunately.
Absolutely. I mean, the pitchforks are coming. Now,
Yeah,
I think they're going to do what they can do, but the next 45 days are the most critical period in US financial history.
I agree.
Every expert, I mean, based on what I'm seeing here, looking at this eclipse, looking at, one of the things is, I made a lot of forecasts last year, starting
Sure.
September, saying we are going to go into a greater meltdown than we did in 87, than we did in 2000, than we did in 2008 or 1929. And we're right on schedule.
Yeah. Yeah. And well, right. And if we have, people are expecting when we come out of this, it's going to be like the roaring 20s when we came out of the Spanish flu. I don't think it's going to be so roaring, this thing is just so insidious because it's been engineered. It's so contagious. I don't blame the people who are against the lockdowns because I can see they're afraid that it's going to be like a takeover and we're going to take everyone's rights away. But if you read the frontline health workers, what they're saying and what they're seeing and what they're experiencing, people are in such illness that it could overwhelm the hospitals in a couple of days.
Absolutely. And we're nowhere near we're nowhere near done with this. We're still in the first we're still in the first in the peak we're like at the tipping point on the other side of the peak in the first wave, with the potential second and third wave to come. So
Yeah,
I just think it's insane that, they want to open up business. They're telling, Trump, they're putting tremendous pressure on Trump. And
sure.
Trump is saying, I would like to open the country on the start of May, on May 1st. But the reality is that we're just not there.
Well, aren't they going to open up the South Carolina beaches on Tuesday?
They're going to open up South Carolina beaches. They're opening up Ohio. They're opening up Florida beaches. They're going to be opening up Texas, right? So here's the problem with that. Those borders, right? They're opening them up, but they're not containing the borders. They're not locking down the state borders.
Well,
So
yeah,
this is
because
where,
right.
yeah.
So people are going to go from state to state to experience some freedom.
Right, right. So look, here's the big thing. If we have a second reinfection, which according to the eclipse, one of the things we can say with certainty is everything, any initiative, any project, any plan that's rolled out 90 days prior to an eclipse, any bailout program, anything they do will not work. It will not work. It will fall short of expectation. It'll require a drastic revision, a radical restructuring of it. It will require it to be completely revised from the bottom up. It will fall short of the mark in a most dramatic way, at the most inopportune time, that will reveal something much more disturbing and deeper, especially as we find more revelations. There'll be more disturbing revelations coming out about the nature of the virus, its origin, combined with what's really going on with the economy and what they've been really doing, and
Well,
why
the
they're so
derivative,
really nervous.
the Bank of International Settlements, I mean, if you start to look at their balance sheet, I mean, what they say, the derivative exposure of all the banks and the companies in the world, how many trillions? It's like in the hundreds, right?
Oh, in terms of, look, the amount of debt that was created is now $325 trillion.
Yeah, yeah.
325 trillion. Here's the thing. The New York Empire State Index dropped to a record level of negative 78.2. You could take that Empire State Index to go all the way back to the early 1920s, right? It's never hit negative 78. And we're only, what, 3 or 4 weeks into this? And we're
Yeah.
already negative 78. We also have, like, the industrial production has fallen 6%, the steepest decline since World War II. Retail sales are worse than they ever were at the height of the 2008-2009 recession.
Well, yeah, the stores are closed.
They're all closed. And so, look, the fact of the matter is we injected $6 trillion. They said, we know it's not enough. Don't worry, GM. We'll keep injecting you money while you lay off people, and it's okay. Steady as it goes. Extend and pretend. We open up May 1st, and everything's going to be fine. I'm going to tell you something, and I know we're in the same, we look at it the same way.
No, I
The
love
reality is,
how you look at it.
okay, thank you, Monty. Look at, I'm going to tell you right now, this eclipse, the fact that we're going through a Pluto return with this
Yes.
Jupiter, Saturn, Pluto, right? It's Jupiter, Saturn, Pluto conjunction on the Pluto of the US, opposing the Mercury Sun conjunction while we go through this eclipse at 0 point, means there will be a revelation or a series of disturbing revelations that are going to cause a major backfire or blowback to the current, let's get back to business, or whatever they try and push through or ram down our throats. And the revelations will be so disturbing, you will hate them and reject them first before you accept them.
That makes sense. Well, a Pluto return, so that's 240 something years.
248 years.
248 years. So Pluto is the phoenix rising from the ashes. So something, it
Well,
cannot.
first you got to get to the ashes before you rise, right? You have to
That's
have the
just what
breakdown.
I was looking for the words to say it.
Right.
Yes, yeah. Well, I'm trying to continue my course and my career as a unicorn pooping baby boomer. We have to think everything
Unicorn
is
and
great.
rainbows.
Yeah, we poop unicorns and rainbows, just like that's what we do.
Right.
But I do think it's going to be good. I think if people, I've been into nutrition since I'm 16, so we're talking about 1966, and I've been into spirituality since before that. And those two things, I think You might have read, I posted about
Mhm.
Rudolf Steiner and what he said
Yes,
about a virus. He thought, I'm no doctor. He said a virus is what a cell secretes if it's toxic. And
correct.
he assigned the fact that the Spanish flu was an airborne, particulate transfer
Hmm.
plague, as opposed to the other plagues that had happened through dirty water and rats and God knows what. He thought this was all a result of toxic cells from the electrification that was happening to the planet as electricity was wired into houses and countrysides in 1917, 1918, and all this other stuff. And he postulated that there would be other kinds of viruses also transmitted by fluids, by respiratory as a result of the electrification. And now there are people that relate this to 5G. I'm not saying that that's what it is, but it
Hmm.
could be.
Could be,
Um,
absolutely.
and,
I mean,
and
it could
going,
be triggering it for
it
sure.
could be, because Wuhan was definitely the center of China's rollout of 5G because they had the international military games were held there in October of 2019, and they wanted to show the world all the greatest military athletes from around the world. They wanted to show them that they had 5G and that they needed it for that kind of thing. And then Milan was the rollout of 5G in Italy, so that was the center of the coronavirus there.
Hmm.
New
Hmm.
York, though I think New York, the elevator buttons have more to do with the spread of that, and the subways have more than
Well,
5G.
subways
So,
certainly don't help.
no, they don't. And
Right.
there's some people on the city council who are trying to call for the closing of the subways. That
That might
would,
actually help. I mean, I know that's
I think
radical, but
so.
at this
It's
point, I think we
radical.
need to consider that. Look, there's going to be a second wave, folks. All right, Monty, we're on the same page, right? I want to make
Oh,
sure.
well, yeah,
Yeah,
especially if they open too soon.
right. Especially if they open too soon, and we're talking maybe not New York. I mean, it looks like New York's going to be closed certainly till the end of June, early July at the soonest. But there will be a second wave, and the second wave won't be accelerating and intensifying necessarily in New York. It'll be happening in Texas, Florida, Ohio, and elsewhere, even Pennsylvania, which is
You mean,
considering opening up now.
so you're saying all the places that opened early are going to be the second wave's precursor?
Correct, correct. And the reason I'm saying that's because this eclipse, and as this second wave starts taking, right, we'll see the numbers drop in New Jersey, the death numbers drop, the New York infection rates drop, and then we'll see as that's dropping, we'll see another wave coming up, but it'll be happening elsewhere, right?
Right.
And it'll run its course, and you know, and it probably the virus is there's different strains, by the way, right?
Oh yeah.
So we see one wave is one strain, the second wave will be another wave, and then historically, if you go back and compare it to the Spanish flu, which was the last world pandemic exactly 100 years ago, a little bit over
Yeah.
100 years ago, we
Right.
had a third wave.
Oh my! I didn't know about the third wave.
Yes, we had a third wave, which
And people,
occurred in December to January 1919.
wow. Yeah, and I think the second wave killed more people than the soldiers that died in World War One.
Correct. That is totally correct.
Yeah, it's I think what people have to do is to try and drink. Well, what Rudolf Steiner said is the most important thing is drink really good water and be spiritually elevated. And I would add to that, spend your money on things that you need to live, and don't think that just because it's going to appear that things are starting to open up that it's going to get back the way it was. Make your base secure, which is the first rule of warfare. Is
Hmm.
do things that make it so that you're out of debt, or that at least you have enough food. Don't think that happy days are here again.
Absolutely. So, I just think that the astrologers need to be more vigilant. We got to get rid of the hope porn. We have to be optimistic.
The
We know
hope porn, I
ultimately.
love that.
Do you like that?
I
Hope porn.
do.
Yeah. Yeah. Look, you here's the thing. There's a time when there will be a time after the dust settles, we'll see the transformation take place. But right now, we're going through the breakdown, the decay, the death part. We're going through that part of the phase. The phoenix will rise, folks,
Yes, for
but
sure.
we're not there yet. We're certainly not close to being there right now.
No, and this is prophecy times. We're living through sacred times. I was privileged to know a Mayan shaman named Hunbat's Men, and I asked him about. It's funny because you were showing before, you were showing the enchanted spell board. We did a shamanistic one called the Pathfinder, which I'll send you actually. It's out of
Oh,
print
great.
now, and it's first person kind of thing. And I felt kind of odd, because I'm not a first person, obviously. And I was on what's called the Prophets Conference down in the Yucatan, and
Mhm.
he was sort of running it, and Zecharia was there,
Wow.
Romulo Melchizedek, Edward Mitchell, the astronaut.
Of course.
I mean, it was just it was an incredible group of people. And I said to Hunbat's Men, I showed him the thing. He said, "Yes, we need this. We have to make thousands of shamans now. We're entering sacred times."
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that correlated with the galactic alignment
Yeah,
that
right,
occurred
right,
in
right. Yeah,
2012.
the
Right.
harmonic convergence.
Right. Right. So, yeah. So, look, things have been accelerating and intensifying and speeding up. I actually wrote a very in-depth article on the Mayan end date. And
Oh,
for
right.
those of
I
you,
saw that. That was amazing
yeah,
what you wrote.
right. Thank you. I'll just show it to people real quick so they have a reference to it. So if you just go here
You're talking about the
and
calendar and
the
the
Mayan
K the
calendar end
KCON.
date. Yeah, and actually the end date is not a one-day event. It's actually a period
No,
from 2012 to 2032, right? So let's see, this is the article here,
I was
and
there. That's where we
yeah,
went.
yeah, and it goes into it all, and then I frame it into what it means in terms of a Western astrological viewpoint. But what's interesting about this is that so it talks about the K-tune, the error. So we're in this era. We're going through this period right now, this transition as the solar system goes through the galactic plane, through the dark rift, where the center of the Milky Way galaxy is. And the K-tune is sort of like this sub period or this
Sure.
Time Lord period, according to the Mayan system, that began on December 21st, 2012, and where it totally aligns with this, right? This period, right? And it's a prophecy. There's a prophecy for this time period until 2032. All right. For half of the K-tune, there will be food, and for half, some misfortunes. This K-tune brings the end of the word of God. It is a time of uniting for a cause. And it's essentially, uh, it's really about a period where there will be a collapse of false belief systems, both sacred and religious, and secular belief systems such as science based on mechanistic materialism, as a new paradigm begins to emerge, and thus people's confidence in religious leaders, government officials, leading to doubt and distrust of world leadership in providing the necessary solutions and guidance during this period of unprecedented global crisis. So we are in the 2012 to
Yes.
2032 K-tune period that started during the alignment, the Mayan. And look at this. I put this occupy everything. So
Yeah, really.
that's what's next, folks.
Yeah. Well, no, it's 100% true because the nobody had it done worse to them than the people of South America. Because if it wasn't the Anunnaki screwing around with them, with the human sacrifices and the word we all say when we pray, Amen, that means hidden. And Ra, after that war between gods and men, was exiled. Ra, which was Enki, was
Right.
exiled to South America, and he took his people with him. And on the coast, on the east coast of Mexico, are these 8-foot statues of people that look like they're African. And in the Mexican museums, there's statues of African animals like zebras. Where they come from? Because
Right.
these guys flew. And so they talk about gods and false gods. You talk about the god Quetzalcoatl, which means the winged serpent. And
Exactly.
what is a winged serpent? An airplane. And
Right.
so they came in these airplanes, the winged serpent, and they showed Quetzalcoatl as having beards. Nobody in South America had a beard. As a matter of fact, Zechariah postulated that might be the mark of Cain. that the race that went to South America and North America that didn't have beards, that was the mark of Cain.
Well, look what I
But
have.
anyway, yeah,
Man
oh yeah,
God, Kokukan.
Quetzalcoatl.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Quetzalcoatl. That's him.
yeah, the winged serpent. And so these guys had the ability to fly,
Mm-hmm.
and they screwed around with these people and did all this kind of horrible stuff. So if the end of that time would be to no more gods, they're not saying no more God, they're saying no more gods. In other words,
Correct.
you have to be yourself.
So
You
this
have to,
implies a spiritual crisis, a spiritual death
yeah,
rebirth,
and
right?
not putting your faith in princes.
Exactly. And so there's no quick fix solution. We have to go through this rebirth. And it's also part of uniting for a cause. And the Mayan elders stated, and this is from when they met in 2012,
Yes,
they stated that the period of suppression of dissenting voices in all areas of life by governments, creating civil unrest that will lead to violent forms of group defiance and rebellion. Nations will suppress other nations, groups will suppress other groups, and the use of violent force will increase. Therefore, we are likely to see a reemergence of large-scale organized protest movements around the world. Example, Occupy Wall Street, with the primary driving issues being a social and economic inequality, corporate greed, and unwarranted influence of banks and the financial sector of government. Isn't that happening now?
it sure is. And remember that during the Depression, when they used to auction off a farm, this happened a lot. All the farmers in the area would arm themselves and come to the auction and stand there with the bank's guy, trying to auction this place off. The guy who owned the farm that was being auctioned off, who couldn't pay his bills, would bid an incredibly low amount, and the guys with the guns would just stand there, and then he'd get his house back because
I see.
people did organize. And this time it could be that, or it could be something similar to that. I'm actually quite impressed by how nice people are, and that there have not been things like that so
Mhm.
far.
So far.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well,
I mean,
if this was the 1950s, forget it. If you had a bunch of people like my father and the men at that time who had been to war, oh,
mhm.
forget it. They'd be in the street now with their weapons.
Right. Well, it may get to that. I mean, they do mention violent protests. Now, I won't go that much more into the article, but I do. This is the chart of the Mayan long count end date, world of the fifth sun. This is the transition into the world of the fifth sun. And you could see the sun is at 0 degrees of Capricorn. Now,
Right
this is
opposite,
important.
right opposite the eclipse.
Right. So let me point that out. Right opposite the eclipse, right, which is at 0 degrees of Capricorn. See, it's 0, 0. I know it shows like a 1 here, but
No,
it's
because it
0
can't show
degrees.
zero. Right.
Yeah. Okay. So it's 0 degrees. So this eclipse is setting off this chart that right now we're in the middle of this period, this Time Lord period, this K-tune period. So I believe we are going to see tremendous revelations and events unfold in the next 60 days.
Well, it's all that Sagittarius. Sagittarius can't help themselves. They have to tell the truth. They're so
Right.
blunt. My father was a Sagittarius.
Right. So yeah, so this is right on the galactic center, right?
Yep.
And it's interesting because yeah, I mean, I write a whole analysis on the chart itself, what it means, but it's collective spiritual maturation that will require humanity to discard religious dogma. And religious dogma meaning whatever we thought who we were up to this point, how we defined ourselves, right,
Right.
based on some form of dogma, and restore our relationship between ourselves and God, right?
Well, look what happened. People couldn't go to church. So they had to realize that, you know what? You don't need a church, and you don't
Right.
need an intermediary between you and God. So, I mean,
Absolutely.
you and I, we probably know this, and a lot of people know this, but I'm just saying
Right.
a lot of people who are church going people, and God bless every one of them, they realize if I can be in church right here looking in front of my computer or in my
That's
car.
right. So it's still definitely this is part of the transition. And also this configuration, this Yod configuration in the horoscope is very much suggesting and that many of our intractable problems facing civilization will reach a crisis level at this time where the eclipse is setting off that Mayan calendar event, causing great suffering that will deepen humanity and make it question and be more open to a greater understanding of the higher laws of life and the universe.
And I don't. We shouldn't scare people because, in terms of suffering, I think we're already there. When you read stories of people having to say goodbye to their beloved parents over the phone because they're not allowed to be in the hospital, that's about as bad as it gets. And to people in the past, they would have thought that was, first of all, impossible. Second of all, against the will of God. What's going on in the hospitals right now with these poor frontline hospital workers? They're seeing things that people don't see in the military or
Absolutely.
similar. Where
Absolutely.
some guy is dying over there and calling out for their mother here, except your mother is outside, but you can't come in.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
horrible. It's like
Right.
9/11.
So look, it's I just think we're going to see more of an intensification of what we have now.
Yeah.
Hopefully cooler heads will prevail, and it doesn't look, there's always the worst case scenario and there's a best case scenario, and I think
Now
as a
you're
metaphysical,
talking about the boomers. We come in with the best case scenario.
that's right. So like the future is not completely set in stone, but there is enough intimations and enough auguries and enough testimonies showing that we are now probably going through a paradigmatic colossal collective transformation. And this is not simply about a virus or my pension. This is not simply about me being able to retire and go to Florida and play golf all day. All of those type of concerns that have been defined by the postmodern 1945 world is actually fraying,
Yeah.
falling
Well,
apart and fraying.
it's we actually have to do for the least of us as best as we can. It's the end of the dark ages. It's the beginning of the Aquarian Leo polarity, where every person is a king, every person is a star,
Right.
every person is a queen. But from the I happen to have a theory, and it's just a theory, but I wrote a book about it called Quantum Affirmations. And in quantum physics, they postulate multiple probable futures implied by a present. And I'm not saying that things are not going to be the way we're talking about, but we each have our own future. And there are people that thrived during the Depression. And so my quantum affirmations theory involves visualizing the future that you want to get to and seeing it warts and all. So seeing it that, yes, there'll be deprivations, and yes, you'll have to be pretty smart, but there are people that survived the Holocaust. So it's visualizing a future that you can get to, warts and all, and that'll help your subconscious mind help you get to it. So I've been quantum affirming, sort of like you said, it doesn't have to be as bad as we can envision. It can be a better, but that also might be because I'm a unicorn pooping baby boomer.
Well, I will say this, that we have to see it for what it is, and then we have to reframe it and decide on how we want it to turn out. So it's important to see things as they really are in order for us to then use all the spiritual tools that are at our disposal to create a more compelling future than the one that we are moving away from. So the world that, look, it's no doubt about this. If the question becomes, what type of world are we moving to or moving towards, right? Because it's clear that the world, the 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 1945 to 2020 era has come to an end, and we're at the tipping point. There's
Without a
massive
question.
transition.
Yes.
Okay. So now, what spiritual tools, right? Can we, and when I talk spiritual tools, I'm talking about, things that now are integrated into NLP and a lot of the material that was in the S, right? The S, a lot of that S material. How can we start employing that? How can we start using meditation in a way that empowers us? How can we start putting this all together that makes this a time where we thrive, not one where we just survive, but we can thrive and we could be part of this transition. We can be not only a voice or an instrument, right, but we can somehow make a contribution to a transition to this new world, this Mayan, right, the Mayan fifth sun world we're moving towards.
Well, I think we're doing it by having these kind of conversations. You're teaching astrology and teaching all the other things that you teach, because the truth shall set us free. Let's hope.
Right, right. So, I mean, we went all the way from Anunnaki to the Mayans, but they're all really connected here
Oh
because
yeah,
we're
definitely.
basically the Mayan tradition and goes all the way back to the Anunnaki period in terms of that
Yes,
they talk about an extraterrestrial, or the gods come down, gave us this
yes,
profound knowledge, taught us this astrology, taught us this mathematics, this physics that was. It wasn't until what year? It wasn't until 1991 where we're able to determine the exact 0 point center of the galactic plane where it intersects with the center of the Milky Way. We did not have the mathematics, the physics. The Mayans had that calculated out thousands upon thousands of years before.
yes,
And
and
right,
they have their special places were all designed for figuring out the first day of spring,
right,
as all the monumental buildings around the world are, because
right.
I mean, for a few reasons. One of the reasons being that every time an age changed, rulership of Earth changed, and that's something we should get into on another conversation,
Absolutely.
because that's the
Absolutely.
origin of the 12 signs. And
Right.
sometimes I wonder when people talk about the conspiracies, who's at the top? It might be one of the Anunnaki gods who's still here.
Well, I still think they're here.
Oh,
And
they are.
the evidence is overwhelming, and I sort of want to finish up today and talk about what does this mean in terms of talking about aliens and gods. What does this mean in terms of ET and extraterrestrials and disclosure, because we touched upon disclosure last time we spoke, and this is what I see. I'll tell you what I see, and let me just show you a slightly different chart here. Let me bring it up. Let me bring this over here. Let me bring it up to my UFO file, and here's my UFO file.
It's cool that
And
you have a UFO file.
yeah, notice all the events I have starting from 1561 all the way up till the Phoenix Lights that
What was
occurred in
the Battle of
1997.
Los Angeles?
Yep, the Battle of Los Angeles, right? We could do a whole show on that. But I wanted to show this was the Roswell incident, right?
Sure.
July 7th, 1947, 9:18 a.m. in Roswell. And this time was confirmed by Associated Press when the Roswell Air Base, Army Air Base, informed AP that they recovered a down
Spacecraft.
flying
Yep.
saucer spacecraft. Okay, so notice here that the sun, okay, the sun is right on the invariable plane. So the sun is on the invariable plane. So the invariable plane is the net center, the dead center, where all the orbits line up. So if you said, okay, if you took the orbits of Pluto all the way down to Mercury, and we projected the dead center, what would be the where they all net to zero, where all the orbits net to zero, and then project that onto the ecliptic, it would be between 13 and 16 degrees of Capricorn Cancer axis. Now, what's
So it's
interesting,
like the x-axis of all the planets. It's like the
correct,
line. It's the line of the sine wave.
exactly. So, what we found historically is that all major world powers, all major significant events, for example, the United States happens to have it, it's a world superpower. The UK happens to have its planets right on the galactic at the other end. So it happens to have it's on so the sun of the UK is on the invariable plane. The sun of the US is right on the invariable plane. And we've seen this with Bitcoin, for instance. I knew Bitcoin wasn't going away when all the astrologers predicted on Facebook in 2011, telling me, William, you're embarrassing us. Stop talking about Bitcoin. Right now, it's what, $7,000, $8,000. It
Yeah,
just
but it
keeps
went as
going up.
high as 11, right?
Right. So yeah, it went as high as 17,000.
Oh,
Right. So
really?
at the point I knew, because it was on the invariable plane, it's here to stay and it's going to have historical, powerful significance. So, uh, so like every major empire, if you could look at every significant corporation, they have a major planet on the invariable plane. In many instances, it's the sun. What's interesting here about Roswell is the fact that the sun is on the invariable plane and you have a Saturn Pluto alignment.
In Leo.
Saturn-Pluto alignment. Yes. And so here, let's go to the eclipse. Note here, the eclipse is, right? So you have a Saturn-Pluto alignment, and
Right.
notes what's going on here. We have a Jupiter-Saturn-Pluto alignment making a direct hit to the sun of the Roswell event,
Wow.
right? And the eclipse is making a direct hit to the Venus at 29 Gemini.
In Gemini, so it will be disclosed.
There will be some, this is all connected to disclosure. This crisis, in a way, is connected to the disclosure, and it's all connected and stringing all the way back to the Mayan end count date. So the revelations, right, when they talk about the end of the gods, right? This is the, not the God, but the gods, right? We're
Right.
going to find out who the real gods are, what our
Wow.
true history and origins are, that it's all connected.
Wouldn't
And
that be great?
yeah, so I think that ultimately it's leading towards a massive disclosure event that they can no longer contain, suppress, repress, deny, marginalize, although I'm sure many astrologers will try, right? So, they have to. If they
Don't
don't,
care. Don't care. Don't let them
don't
know they
let,
get to you.
but they will, just like they're doing it with the economy, just like they're saying that it's just the flu, bro. Trust me, folks, they will deny it.
Not the flu. Oh my
Right,
God. That.
right,
Oh.
right.
No, so there will be disclosure according to this astrology for sure. I mean, look at
Absolutely.
Venus at the 10th house cusp.
Yes, exactly. Venus at the 10th house cusp, they're making a direct hit to Mars. The eclipse hitting right on Venus. This entire cluster, remember, it's Saturn Pluto. We're having another Saturn Pluto event making a direct hit to the Mercury. It's been hitting, it's right on the invariable plane. So with what we've noticed here, now this is something that Charles Jane taught, was when you have outer planets cross the invariable plane, whether they're in Cancer or Capricorn, what happens? Big stuff goes down in history. And we have the three biggest planets out there that
Yeah.
are conjuncting in terms of their power, archetypal power, that making right on the invariable plane, making a direct hit to this Roswell chart. And this is going to blow everything open. So this is how I believe it all ties together in terms of what we've discussed today.
Fabulous. Well done.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, you were
So,
early to announce. You've been telling people this for a while.
yeah, I know. I'm sort of like the Cassandra of astrology. I'm
And
going to win the Cassandra Award soon.
I live on Sandra Road. Sometimes Amy and I think we live on Cassandra Road. She was the one that was blessed by the gods to know the truth, but no one would believe her.
Exactly, exactly. So I'm starting to feel like maybe there's a Cassandra asteroid right on my midheaven.
Ha!
So yeah, it's quite possible. I mean, that's something I'm going to actually look up and see the most accurate astrologers historically, and I'm not including myself in that list, but I want to see if they have a prominent Cassandra, because a lot of these guys struggled and they were
Well,
nailing it left and right.
how about Galileo?
Yeah.
I mean, Copernicus. I mean, I posted something the other day and I cited, I think, Fox News or the New York Post or something. And people are like, I won't read that. I won't look at that. And I'm thinking, you want to be like the Pope who wouldn't look through Galileo's telescope?
Mm-hmm.
At least gold is where you find it. Check it out and see what you think.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Totally.
I started reading right-wing blogs back in before 2001 because I wanted to see when they were coming to kill all the astrologers and the tarot readers. I read everything, and I found a lot of what they were writing was true. So
Right.
I really believe gold is where you find it. You should read everything, all the things that you disagree with, but at least put it in your mix.
Well, you know what I do? I read all the astrologers that I not only disagree with, but I look at their technique and I look at their approach, because and then I say, okay, now I know what's not going to happen. All right, let's see what is going to happen. If this is not what's going to happen, what is going to happen? And I'm using astrologers who continually use faulty. See, look, let me be honest, Monty. It's not that I'm anti-organized astrology. My issue with the establishment astrologers is not the fact of the techniques that they use. You don't see me writing about problematic techniques or techniques that don't have a consistent track record. My issue has to do with their modeling. It
Hmm.
has to do with the modeling, partially their worldview, but more importantly, they're modeling, which integrates that worldview in terms of how they're applying the astrology. And part of the modeling is they're taking a natal astrology modeling and projecting that into a mundane perspective, and it falls
Right.
short of the mark.
Right. Yeah, because the world, you're not talking about the world's personality.
Correct. And so, I mean, I'm seeing this over and over again. And we had one prestigious astrologer, not prestigious, he's a well-noted astrologer, who does, he writes, he has an excellent sun sign column. He did that for years. He sits on the board of ISAR, and he selects which speakers get to speak and not speak. And he actually stated in a video interview that the last time we had Saturn Pluto in the early 1980s, nothing big happened. Therefore, he stated that. And just for those folks who don't remember, if you look at the period during that Saturn Pluto period from 1979 to 1983, that period when Saturn Pluto was going back and forth, what happened? We had the Reagan Revolution, we have Afghanistan invaded,
Right.
we had the collapse, the economic collapse of the Soviet Union. We saw that was a big one. We saw the Chernobyl crisis. We saw 4 different Soviet leaders die until Gorbachev came. We saw a whole host of things. The U.S. was in its worst recession since the Great Depression. It got so bad that it allowed Reagan to win the biggest landslide of all time, right?
Yes.
Interest rates was scored. You were coming of age at that point. I was still in high schools.
That's
You
30.
know what the economy was like, right?
Yeah, it was crap.
It was crap, right? And so there was a whole host. It was the height of the Cold War. There was we had an actual second Cuban Missile Crisis during that period.
Yes.
And so a whole series of things were going on. So he made this statement, and then he said, because nothing big happened, he did not expect this year in 2020, and this was in January. He sits on the board of ISAR that nothing big will happen this time. And here's the problem. He's a natal astrologer. He primarily writes about signs. He's probably a good natal sun sign astrologer, right? And he's projecting that viewpoint. His modeling is completely faulty, and his understanding of history in relevance to the outer planetary alignments is completely faulty. So this is what's happening now in the astrological world. It's not so much that, hey, I'm such a brilliant astrologer or you're such a brilliant astrologer. It's the fact is they're not looking at where these alignments, what they truly do. Their modeling is completely off.
Well, if they really know people, they would understand that what you've been predicting is true. And also if they know systems, because what the system that has existed, like you said, post 47, it's just not working anymore. And to say that nothing is going to happen when everything is flashing red, the yield curve inverts and all this other stuff is going on, to say that nothing is going to happen is to ignore reality.
Right.
Forget about astrology. It's to ignore basic financial principles. That's what I don't understand. And the derivative market is a mess.
Right. And when was the beginning of the post 45 postmodern period? Was 45 to 47 with the Saturn Pluto conjunction. Right. Saturn Pluto conjunction. This is 1947. So it came into alignment in 45 at the end of the Second World War when we dropped 2 atomic bombs on Japan. That was the initiation of the Saturn Pluto. Then we had the Cold War. We had the Roswell incident, and we had a series of other things, the Truman Doctrine, Cold War policy doctrine. Nothing happened, right? Nothing. Then we had it happen again, right? In 1979 to 1983. Nothing happened. And nothing's happening now.
Well, nothing's happening now because no one could get out of their house.
That's right. Good point.
But I tell you, there are some good things that are going on now. I think it's fascinating that Trump has not been more federal and has allowed the states. He's really followed the Constitution that way. I think that is a positive thing. I'm not saying I like everything that's happening,
right?
But everyone's always accusing him and saying that this is some plot to take over and right. And I'm not saying martial law might not happen in selective areas, but right. He certainly doesn't seem like he wants that.
No, he doesn't. No. I look. The only thing I could fault him on right now, just 2 things, and this is not like He needs to find a way to get Congress and force Nancy Pelosi to get money injected into households that are substantially larger and on a continuous basis all the way between now and the end of the year. So, and suspend mortgage payments. So inject liquidity into households, suspend mortgage payments, suspend rent payments, right? Have a government program that will pay, you know, those landlords and such, right? Mortgage companies and such. They have to do that. Look, if they bailed out everything else, the least they could do
Just bail
is
out the
give us
people.
the means
Yeah.
so we are not forced to go back to work or break the law or break out pitchforks and guns. So that's number
Yeah.
one. So that's my one criticism. My other criticism is he's being pressured and he knows the numbers. He's looking at the spreadsheets. The economy's imploding. So he can't give in. He's giving into that worry because he's afraid. And this is me project. So this is what I think based on his chart and what I know.
Yeah.
He's concerned he'll lose the election because the economy imploded under his watch, even though what has occurred was not his fault. It was by intelligent design that occurred in a Wuhan lab. Who authorized that and who's behind it is still being investigated. People will not blame him for what's happening if he does the right thing. And the worst thing he's doing now is trying to open it up for business too soon, too fast. Number one. And number two, he's not injecting liquidity into the very people that are going to vote for him
I agree.
in November.
Yeah, I think this was the big mistake of the 2008 implosion, was that they bailed out the banks. They should have just given the money to the people. The money would have gotten to the banks through sales and through people spending the money.
Well, yeah. So they already bailed out everything and everyone, right? And it's still not enough. Monte, they got to still inject more. They're going to inject another 6 trillion. That's a prediction, folks. Six
Wow,
more trillion.
that's a lot of
Right.
money.
That's a lot of money. They're going to inject it, but they need to take some of that money and give it to people who desperately need it and suspend mortgage payments, or else we're going to have, if we have a second wave, and we're going to have a second wave, right? If we have a second wave and they don't do this, we're talking about catastrophic scenarios, no matter how much rainbows and unicorns we want to talk here, you know?
Wait, I immediately perk up. No,
Right.
actually in New York, the governor did do that. He has suspended mortgage payments for the last and rent payments for 3 months.
Right. So Trump needs to direct or send a strong directive, a suggestion to the governors to do that in every state and start putting out programs to people, small businesses, medium businesses. And if he does that, okay, he'll get reelected. He'll beat mighty Joe Biden, who can't even put a sentence together at this point.
Mighty
All right.
Joe.
I mean, it's sort of a Trumpzilla
Yeah,
versus mighty Joe Biden, right? This is
kind of sad.
what we're left, yeah, kind of a sad situation we have now. So look, we're gonna wrap this up now, but I had a really great time. We could go
Me
on. I could easily go on another couple hours with you.
too. Well, we'll talk about some other crazy stuff. We'll get into the really crazy stuff next time.
Sure. All right. You just let me know what you want to talk about, Monty, and I'll definitely be there for you.
Okay, and no rainbows
Okay.
and unicorns next time.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much for attending. Everyone out there, thank you for attending. We hope you just stay positive, stay strong. Monty, you want to say anything to the audience?
No, I just want
Cameo
everybody
for us?
to really do everything that they can do to make their base secure. There was a general named, he was a colonel, a Prussian colonel called von Clausewitz, and he wrote the book called On War. And he said the first rule of warfare is make your base secure, which is not necessarily true nowadays, but it certainly makes sense. And they still study his book in war colleges around the world. So make your base secure. You're better off with things that you can use to stay safe and healthy than you are with digits in a bank account, especially over the next few months.
Yes. And most importantly, take care of your health. Be safe
Yes.
out there. Don't take anything for granted. And the best thing you can do at this time is put a plan together, a best case scenario plan, but most importantly, a worst case scenario plan. The best way to get out of urgency is to develop a plan and get resourceful. And I know people are running out of money, and I'm going to tell you the truth. They're not going to be injecting that liquidity fast enough. If they
No.
do it, hopefully they will, but it won't be fast enough. So come up with a plan. Keep a clear mindset. Do not get caught up with try not get caught up with the fear porn either. All right.
Yes.
Although people do accuse me of that at times, especially the astrologers.
Well,
But
you're
it's
excited because you've been not looking forward, but you've been forward looking to this
right,
day for so
right,
long, and it's here.
right.
It's not theory anymore. It's reality.
It's reality. The rubber is hitting the road. The astrology is hitting, the reality of the archetypal alignments are now hitting the road. And let me tell you something, the reality of it's all going to hit our living rooms about September, because this recession or depression, it's really a depression. They're not even using the word recession anymore. The depression is more of a theoretical thing that's not real until this fall when it hits you. So you need to use all your spiritual knowledge. You need to get informed. You need to get some very precise planning and strategy from the best people, best resources out there. And now is the time to really put it into practice. And most importantly, I think I mentioned this last time, I mean, what I'm doing a lot more of, and it's really helped me get more centered and become more of a channel for this archetypal alignments and articulate them in a more concise and in a much more clear way, is meditation.
Sure. We actually have done a few meditation kits. I don't know if they're still in the stores, but I'll start posting stuff on my Facebook and Instagram, some meditation stuff.
And when all else fails, folks, remember, enchant it, spellboard. All
Yeah,
right, the
because then you're
magical
talking to those on
messaging
the other
from the
side.
spirit. Yes. When all else fails, all right, use this, and I will assure you, you will get the spiritual knowledge you need to thrive during this period.
And if you have nothing else to do, the Creativity Oracle actually works, and it has my wife's incredible art on 80 cards. And because right now you got to get creative with your life.
Mm-hmm.
That's part of
Totally.
the meaning of this whole time period, is for all of us to pass out of this and become. Everyone's going to be a Leo Aquarius polarity. Humanity, a bunch of stars.
Right. Totally. So, yeah. So, look, there's a lot of great tools out there. Let's get resourceful. Try and commit yourself at least sometime during the day, between the hours where you're Netflix binging and eating all those carbohydrates to get you through the night.
Watch
Try and
Babylon Berlin. It's the best thing in the world on
Babylon
Netflix.
Berlin,
Oh my God,
Netflix. Could you
Netflix,
share it?
amazing.
Yeah. What's it
Yeah,
about?
it's about the Weimar Republic days just before World War II. There's
Wow.
parallels to this time. A lot of parallels to this time.
Well, I'm going to certainly start watching it myself,
It's
since it's highly
amazing.
recommended.
They spent $50 million on the first year.
Wow. That's
Yeah,
a lot of
it's the
money.
most expensive television show ever made, and it looks it too. But I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No,
Sorry.
no, no, no. It's good to, but so yeah, I mean, there are, maybe what we should do is list out shows and films that are actually that provide cognitive and spiritual insight to what is going on right now,
Well
right?
then,
And there's a
Occupy.
number of films that are prescient, they're very
Yes.
prescient about this period we're in.
Well, Occupied is another one. That one's in, I think, Norwegian, and it's about the near future, when a very left-wing government in Norway decides that they're going to do thorium reactors and they're not going to supply Europe with gas and oil. And the EU decides to allow the Soviet Union to do a soft invasion of Norway. It's a fascinating examination of how a country can be invaded and what happens, the psychology of that. And
Mm-hmm.
then there's also the French Village, which talks about what happened in World War II, which is fascinating, in France when the Nazis took over. I mean, there's so many amazing things like that.
Yeah,
But
no, absolutely. In fact, maybe we could do a session just on all these different films, Netflix that are available on Netflix, available on Amazon Prime, that dystopian films, films that oppression films that give a perspective of alternative reality that is now starting to shape up to become the reality we're in today, and that have very powerful messages. So that's something we could talk about in the future as
sure,
well. I think that it'd be a fascinating, because I have the charts of most of these films, many of these films. We can look at the chart, talk about the subject matter, see how it relates to what's happening, and that'd be something fun. So we're going to wrap it up here. But I just want to again thank you all for attending, and thank
yeah,
Monte
really.
for being with me today and discussing what we've been discussing. And hopefully we'll do something soon again.
This was a lot of fun. I love it. Thank you. And keep on keeping on, everybody.
Yes, keep on, keep strong, and we'll see you all soon again. Thanks a lot. Take care.